Welcome back, everybody, to the Triad of the Forest podcast, a Puerto Rican podcast talking about Star Wars and other nerd related media. And today we continue our Andor journey, as we call it, an Andor pregame, a Cassian pregame, a Canary pregame. I don't know what you want to call it. We haven't found a cool name for it. We're not Star Wars Explained. We're not the Resistance broadcast. We don't have cool puns for our shows, but we are hyped for Andor season 2 and talking about all the juicy Andor bits that we can in anticipation for the show. And today we have a very special guest to help us talk about Mon Mothma, and first time on the channel, it's Scotty Holiday from Scotty Holiday Star Wars YouTube. How's it going, man? Welcome.
It is going good. We're ripe in Andor season right now, so this is the perfect time to dig into one of the best characters I would say from the series.
It's great. It's great because it's a character that I remember when we saw her for the first time back, back in the days when there wasn't new Star Wars
Mhm.
movies. It was just the original trilogy in anticipation for the prequel trilogy that we just had. Mon Mothma as that one, glorified,
Yup.
as they would call her now, Glub Shido in Return of the Jedi. And then, who is she? What has she done? Obviously, we had all the expanded universe stuff, but nothing really concrete about her. And now we finally have so much media, so much publishing, so much animation, as we'll talk about specifically today, but more importantly, so much representation in live action through Genevieve
Yeah.
O'Reilly's portrayal. So I want to talk a little bit about that with you, but before we get going into all that Mon Mothma stuff, I want to know about your journey a little bit. We always like to have a first time guest on the show talk a little bit about themselves and their Star Wars journey. So,
Mhm.
Scotty, why don't you tell me and the audience and anyone who hopefully will listen or watch your a little bit of your Star Wars journey and how you got to where you are now?
I feel like my Star Wars journey was kind of a long time in the making, at least to where I am now. I saw The Force Awakens. I saw The Phantom Menace for the first time in 1999. It was my first Star Wars movie
Mhm.
ever. I was 6. Loved Star Wars up through probably middle school and kept up with all the movies. And then right after middle school, that's when the prequel trilogy ended essentially for me. So it
Mhm.
kind of fell out of like everything Star Wars for a while. I didn't get into the online fandom really up until maybe 2016,
Mhm.
maybe even later than that, and I didn't start making my own content until 2022, which in hindsight feels like it was really recently,
Yeah.
but also feels like it was a long time ago. I even missed my 3-year anniversary like a few weeks ago because it was March of 2022.
Ah,
And
congratulations on that.
thank
Belated
you.
congratulations.
I appreciate it, and that's kind of the thing. I feel like when you're really doing something when you're not paying attention to all those numbers because 'cause you're just so into it.
Mhm.
But yeah, my Star Wars journey's been weird, but in a good way. Like, as a queer person in a super nerdy space, it's always really fun when I get to jump into a conversation IRL with some, like, Star Wars bros or whatever, because I'm like, "Actually, I might know a little bit more lore than you do," and, like, I've been in those situations and I've gotten the craziest reactions. It's so funny, but yeah, I love Star Wars. With my content, I really like to talk about animation. I really like to talk about gaming. I podcast now, so I feel like I do a little bit of everything at this point.
That's great. And animation, we're talking about animation. How did you get into the animated Star Wars environment? Because you were talking about watching the prequels growing up,
Mhm.
and were you watching Clone Wars at that time too, or was Star Wars animation something you found a little, further into, the journey?
Yeah, I feel like this is an even funnier experience because I did not watch the Clone Wars until it was put on Netflix.
Hmm.
So this was probably, I think it was around 2014 at the time when I started
Hmm.
watching it. And at that point, I had already graduated high school. I was 21 maybe, between like 19 and 21. And so I was going through like my partying stage and whatever. And it got to a point when once I found Clone Wars on Netflix, I would leave, like, parties and stuff because I'd be bored, and I'm like, "I'm gonna go home and watch the Clone Wars instead." I would literally go home and,
Fair.
like, binge the Clone Wars, so I didn't get into it until it was, like, my early adulthood, so I completely missed it when it was actually airing on TV, but I think because this was also right before the sequel trilogy was announced, or at least the selling of Lucasfilm,
Mhm,
it
mhm.
was the only new Star Wars content that I was aware of and interested in, so, of course, I binged it, and that kind of got me into it from there. By the time I finished, I think it was a few months later, Rebels premiered.
Mhm.
So it kind of really worked out, I think, in my favor when it came to animation.
No, and that's a journey with animation that I definitely sympathize with because I think I had a very similar experience because I remember when
Hmm.
I was in middle school slash high school when the prequels were coming out. I
Hmm.
never really got into like the Tarkovsky stuff in Cartoon Network
Mm,
or the Clone Wars. I don't know why. Like, it wasn't on the radar that it existed, but
yeah.
it didn't compel me for some reason. I did play a bunch of the prequels games, like
Yeah.
Star Wars Battlegrounds and Galactic Campaigns and
Yes. Star Wars
Jedi
Galactic
Starfighter.
Battlegrounds.
Oh, so good because I was a big Age of Empires
Yeah.
nerd. So all it sounds just like an Age of Empires with Star Wars. Let's go.
Yeah.
But somehow the animation sphere, I just didn't land on it until like you said, the Netflix. Because I remember there was a big deal with Netflix coming out with the Clone Wars
Hmm.
because it had the Lost Missions, like
Yes.
the new season or whatever it
Yeah.
was being branded as. So it was kind of like I remember fandom being excited about that, and being able to just not only just watch them again, but watching some new Clone Wars. So
Yeah.
I feel like same. Like I got into that in a similar way, and ever since, yeah, the 2015 Lucasfilm Disney, the Disney Lucasfilm acquisition, I was just like, okay, we're back, and we're
Yeah.
better than ever. And I think that it's a never look back. Now that I ever stopped looking, but I'm curious. I'm curious because not only do we have Andor season 2 on the horizon, we also
Mhm.
have Star Wars Celebration on the horizon, and
Yes.
with the Bad Batch having wrapped up, obviously Clone Wars wrapped up, obviously Rebels wrapped up, even though it's continuing in some
Hmm.
form on Ahsoka. There isn't really an animated show that we have that is coming out. We have Tales of the Underworld that was recently announced,
Yeah.
and
Very
Visions
excited.
Volume 3, but those are kind of like one off events in
Hmm.
animation, which wonderful, beautiful. We love all the Tales stories so
Yeah.
far, and we adore Visions, but there is going to be a Lucasfilm animation panel, which is going to celebrate the 20th anniversary of it. So I'm
Hmm.
curious to know your thoughts on the state of Star Wars animation right now with Tales of the Underworld, Visions Volume 3, but any hopes, desires, or predictions for what Lucasfilm might announce on Star Wars Celebration?
This is a loaded question,
Yes.
because I'm basically on my third. I'm working on my third Ventress, the future of Star Wars animation video for my YouTube channel. I've already
Mhm,
done like two or three of them, but I can't stop because she's my favorite character. Um, I really enjoyed when she came back for the Bad Batch because
mhm,
like I had read Dark Disciple a few years ago. I think I read that back in like 2021. So it was kind of when I first started getting in the online fandom. And
mhm,
so I was aware of everything that happened. Then to see her come back and then they confirmed that we're going to talk about how she survived and it's going to be told. We're staying true to the novel.
mhm,
So then now seeing her in Tales of the Underworld, I was a little worried that her big return might have just been for Tales of the Underworld,
mhm,
but
mhm.
I'm sticking to my guns. I'm also setting myself up for a lot of disappointment if this doesn't happen. Um,
Spoken like a
but
true Star Wars fan, as we always
ex-
do.
yeah, exactly. I'm trying my hardest not to, but I have a lot of faith in this. I'm ready for the Hidden Path show with Ventress,
Okay.
Quinlan. Give me a multi-season anthology style like the Clone Wars, but with the Hidden Path. There's so many cool characters that can cross over with so many different pieces of Star Wars media. Like you have the Kenobi series, you have Jedi Survivor, and obviously Jedi Fallen Order as well. Plus, you can bring in clones because I know a lot of people want to see the clones back,
Mhm.
and you can even bring them into it. There's so much that you can do and so much story you can tell. At the end of the day, I just want at least a 4 season show. like at
Yeah,
minimum.
yeah. We definitely need a lot more constant.
Yes.
Not a, in live action too, because now with Andor season two finishing,
Mhm.
once it comes back for season two, we don't really have anything on the horizon. I
Yeah.
mean, we know that Ahsoka's gonna film soon or has started filming. I don't
Mhm.
remember what the status on that is, but that's not coming out for a minute, and we don't
Yeah.
know, if season two's it, if there's gonna be, if Ahsoka's gonna keep going.
Mhm.
Mando seems to be kind of done after Mandalorian Grogu film, so
Mhm.
there isn't really like a next thing to take the mantle of like this is our serial television series in either
Yeah.
animation or live action. And I think that animation seems like a safer bet in many ways
Agreed.
for Lucasfilm because it also seems like it's where they're most comfortable and most free to just do whatever they want.
Well, and Star Wars is so good in animation.
Yes.
And honestly, a lot of the animated shows that they've put out have resonated more with me and like gut punched me emotionally than a lot of the live action stuff. I've become one of those people that may prefer Star Wars animation over live action. I love seeing the spectacle of live action, but
Mhm.
I love animated Star Wars. It's just so good.
I think that's one of the best things, right, about a multimedia franchise like Star Wars, that there's so many different points to be able to come into that you can just
Mhm.
find what makes you happy and what makes you feel fulfilled in terms of the
Exactly.
storytelling, and just kind of not necessarily exclusively live there, but maybe exclusively live there. That's the only thing you like, and I think we a lot of fans online, especially like in the old social media side that a lot of us have kind of left, should kind of learn that lesson, right? If like the expanded universe is, the Star Wars world that you love living in and makes you happy, maybe just stay there,
Yeah,
Don't, there's no reason to come out of that world to bash the things that give other people joy. It's a
exactly.
very complicated world that we're living in right now, for
Yeah.
lack of a better term. And we've talked about it on this podcast enough. And it's too complicated, too chaotic, too horrible
Yeah.
for us to kind of just make it even worse by just bashing media that's just supposed to bring joy and happiness to
Yeah.
everybody. But speaking about media that brings joy and happiness, Andor is not one of those. And Andor, as much as I love it, is not a happy show
Yeah.
in the way that Rebels is, or the Clone Wars can be, even though Clone Wars gets pretty dark at times.
Yeah.
And it's a Andor's a tough show for tough times, and it's kind of serendipitous that it's coming back for its second season in
Mhm.
the times that we are currently living in. So, what are your you? I mean, you were talking about how animation is kind of where you prefer to enjoy your Star Wars, but how did Andor season one make you feel? And like, are you excited for season two?
So, Andor would definitely be my number 1 live action Star Wars show. It's right at the top, I'm right with you, I really love Andor, I really loved season 1, and on top of just the great storytelling and the great acting, the great monologues, the great
Mhm,
writing in general, it was also really nice to have those conversations within the fandom and
mhm.
really talking about those real world parallels and how things kind of we could see things mirroring with the real world versus an Andor. And it was cool to see it basically then put the Star Wars blanket over something that was definitely relatable. Like we all want to be a Jedi, right? But like we can't be
Mhm.
Jedi in our galaxy.
Right.
But in the Star Wars galaxy, we could be a rebel.
Mhm.
We can fight fascism, and we can do that in our galaxy as well. And so I really enjoyed that about Andor, and I'm very excited about season two. I do think it's going to be a lot darker,
Mhm.
but I don't necessarily mind that because I like media that makes me feel things.
Mhm. Mhm.
I think all good media is media that elicits some sort of emotion from you. So I'm very excited for season two. I think Andor made me fall in love with Mon, not to get too much talking
Mhm.
about her, but something about Andor and Mon Mothma did not care about her before. Now I love her. Um, Obviously, Diego Luna is amazing as well. I'm a huge Rogue One stan, so at first I was like, "Do we really need a series following Cassian?
Same. Same.
We know he
Absolutely same.
dies,"
Yep.
and now it's
I
my
feel that.
favorite. I don't know why when Rogue One's like my favorite Star Wars movie, I questioned the show that basically ties the closest to it.
Yep.
But yeah, they struck gold with this one.
I absolutely agree with you, and anyone that has listened to this podcast for the amount of time that we've been on will remember that when Andor was announced, I was not enthused.
Yeah,
Obviously, I'll take any new Star Wars because some is a Star Wars is better than no Star Wars.
yeah,
So, but yeah, I was just like, why this one? Why not something new? Why not explore post Return of the Jedi or in the I want to just new Star Wars because there's
yeah,
a lot of and still to this day a lot to be said about stagnation in
yeah,
Star Wars and how uncreative or safe it can be at times. But I was so happy to be pleasantly surprised by by Andor and just be and have all my expectations be exceeded, right? In
yeah.
in a way that it's just like, oh crap, the show that that I didn't care for or was least excited for is all of a sudden my favorite one. And
Right.
now here we are in the advent of season two. And we will talk about Mon, but to set the stage, right? We're talking about Andor and Andor season two. What are you expecting? You said that you were thinking that it's going to be darker,
Yeah.
but we got a trailer that had the uh, pop song. I forgot.
Revolution
There we
starts
go.
now.
Thank you. I'm sorry, my memory these days is just garbage. So thank you for for
Of
being there,
course.
back me up. But we had that first trailer that was a little more joyful, right, than the mood of Andor trailers that we have been used to thus far. Even though Lucasfilm released a second trailer that was more in line with the
Yeah.
broodiness that we expect from the show, but yeah, but tell us a little bit more about like your expectations with where season two might or might not go.
Well, of course, we all know the Gorman Massacre is a thing. We're
Mhm.
gonna see that. I imagine it's gonna be very intense. I'm excited to see what ends up happening with the Ferrix rebels,
Mhm.
because we know they're gonna be in part of it, but we also know they're doing the 3 episode arcs
Mhm.
where it's 1 year for each arc. So I almost wonder if maybe with a lot of these characters, are we going to see the end of their story, or are we just going to bring some characters along for the ride? Because it looks like Bix is going to stay with Cassian for a bit longer, but we
Mhm.
don't know about Brasso. We don't know about B2 Emo. We have to
Mhm.
get K2 in there at some point. So I'm very interested to see where each person, I guess each character goes within this season. And I think it might work because I was a little worried at first, but with season 1, we got the time to spend with those characters and really
Mhm.
understand who they are, and they had time to actually develop. So now that we know who they are, they can kind of open up the world and do a little bit more with season 2. Something that I would like to see is obviously I don't want to say cameos because I don't really want cameos, but like I at least want to see Bail Organa in
Mhm.
season 2. If he's not there, I'm gonna be a little upset, to be honest, because he's such a great character and he's so tied into the rebellion. So I really hope that we see him. Um, and I'm trying to think because we've seen so much of the show. It's just I'm very excited to see how it all comes together and kind of has that neatly tied bow at the end of episode 12 that's supposed to go right into Rogue One. So
Mhm.
I'm very interested to see how it plays out and if it feels as fulfilling as a 12 episode series did versus
Mhm.
kind of
Mhm.
4 3-hour movies.
Right, right. Which is same but different. It's
Hmm.
still 12 episodes. I'm still on the fence about, having that release schedule. I One
Yeah.
of the things that I really enjoyed about season 1 was the, weekly week. I mean, I think there were maybe 2 double releases or 3 double episodes that were released,
Hmm.
but for the most part, it was, we got over 8 weeks of Andor, and I
Yeah.
thought that was just great because the dialogue and the discourse in the fandom at the time was great.
Yeah.
For me, that was the best time in Star Wars social media, in my opinion. Uh,
Honestly.
things have crashed and burned a little bit on the Star Wars socials, at least for me, because there's the exodus from from Twitter into
Yeah.
Threads, and then from Threads into Blue Sky. So I feel like there was a lot of fragmentation in how
Yeah.
discourse was occurring around different Star Wars uh, stories that came out post Andor. But here
Mhm.
we are in a different environment, and hopefully the conversation will be different, but hopefully it's just as engaging.
Yeah.
Um, but a standout character in Andor is not only Cassian, it's Mon Mothma. And fairly recently on your channel, you made a video about Mon. And one of
Mhm.
the things that I'm interested to talk to you about was your opinion on on Mon Moth. I keep fusing those in my brain. Like we said a little bit of the beginning, first time we ever see her is in Return of the Jedi when she at the time was just a glorified glub shido. So
Yeah.
now it's a completely different story. Now she's a main character on this
Mhm.
show, and God bless Genevieve O'Reilly for getting a part in Revenge of the Sith
Yeah.
20 years ago, which is insane to say out loud. But
Mhm.
20 years ago, she got a role as Mon Mothma in Revenge of the Sith that got cut. And who knew that 15, almost 20 years later, she would come back to lead her own show,
Yeah.
and here we are. So what was your journey with Mon? Because as I understand it, you weren't on Team Mon at the beginning of this journey.
Well, I have to bring up the fact that, when you first messaged me about this episode, you said, "Are you a Mon Mothma stan?" And I kinda had to think to myself, "Well, am I a Mon Mothma stan? I like her a lot." And then I kind of thought about the journey that her character has gone on, and mentioning her getting cast in Revenge of the Sith. I was like, Genevieve O'Reilly's basically been playing Mon Mothma for the past 20 years,
Mhm,
which is kind of insane to look back because the only time we've actually seen her, at least up front as Mon, is mostly in Andor.
mhm,
Even her role in Rogue One was still, I wouldn't say it was a cameo, like she kind of had to be there, but it was still very much Caroline Blakiston's Mon
mhm,
Mothma and
mhm, mhm.
Genevieve O'Reilly trying to
Capture
pay.
that, yeah, yeah.
Exactly, exactly, trying to capture what was Mon Mothma, and even going back and watching those deleted scenes in Revenge of the Sith, just, like, the accent that she does, the way that she
Mhm,
speaks in
mhm,
it,
mhm.
is very much closer to the original Mon from Return of the Jedi. So, Return of the Jedi Mon, I always laugh because the only thing I ever think of her is I'm like, "Many Bothans died
Dying
to get us this
this
information."
information.
She's got that haircut that worked for the time period, but
Mhm,
I'm
mhm,
like,
mhm.
now not my favorite. She wears basically a sheet, a poncho,
Ah,
and so for me, I was like, she doesn't really do much, and she's not a baddie.
yeah,
So,
yeah, yeah.
uh, and then, we see her in the Clone Wars,
Mhm.
and she's just kind of there. She's basically Bail Organa's sidekick in the
Mhm.
Clone Wars. I think she only has speaking lines in
She
3 episodes.
she is basically, and I'm glad you went there first, because and I have to say this up front.
Mhm.
Thank you for sending me that YouTube video that
Yes.
had all the Mon Mothma scenes, because otherwise I would be very ill-equipped to speak on this episode. So thank you. But it's definitely hilarious to kind of see, especially the Clone Wars
Yeah,
scenes of hers, because I guess when you watch it in the context of the show, you don't really kind of put it together, but when you
yeah,
watch like the scenes that she's exclusively in, she's basically a glorified NPC
yeah,
in that show. She's probably window dressing. So what? Yeah, like so. We, this is all to say that Mon Mothma and the Clone Wars didn't do much for
no,
your fandom.
no. So, yeah, we get to the Clone Wars, we have Return of the Jedi, we have the Clone Wars. We get to Rogue One, and I'm like, "Okay, this is a great movie. I'm happy Mon's here. She's doing her Mon Mothma thing that we
Mhm,
know her to always do. She looks like Mon Mothma every time we see her. Great." We get into Rebels.
mhm,
In hindsight, up until Andor, I feel like this is the most that they've explored her as a character, and I wanna say she's in 6 episodes of Rebels out of the 4 seasons, but we still
mhm.
got, like, the most Mon Mothma that we ever got up until Andor season 1 came out. And even then, I was just kinda like, "Oh, there's Mon Mothma again." I'm happy to see her actually doing things with the rebellion, expanding, Mon and her leadership within the rebellion.
Mhm.
But then we get to Andor season 1 and we get, our first trailer, first promo shots, and I'm like, Mon Mothma doesn't have a pixie cut. She
Yeah,
has
yeah,
some
yeah,
kind of
yeah.
like
She's
some
looking
really good
fly.
hair.
Yeah.
She's got these amazing gowns on and they're form fitting. They're just not like a sheet over her. And I'm like, she actually looks like you said, she no longer looks like an NPC. She
Yeah.
looks like a fully realized character. And kind of like I already mentioned, that's what made me get into her and like her a lot more as a
Mhm,
character
mhm.
because they expanded so much on her and what she could be. And a lot of that goes to Genevieve O'Reilly no
Mhm,
longer having
mhm.
to play the caricature of Mon, but
Right,
really
that's a
getting
good way to
to
put it. Yep.
but living in Mon as who she kind of feels who Mon is. And after playing her for 20 years, like I think Genevieve O'Reilly is definitely she knows who Mon is at this point. And I'm glad that we got to see more of how her Mon is. It was always Mon Mothma, but like I said, it was a little more Caroline Blakiston. Now we're getting Genevieve O'Reilly really getting to exist in Mon. And that's what made me start to like the character so much. It's so
Mhm.
bizarre in hindsight. I just bought her Black Series figure.
Oh,
like,
I have it. Yeah, I have it. I have it somewhere around for the day that Genevieve O'Reilly decides to do cons, so I can just get that bad boy sign and just put
right?
it up on a shelf and immortalize her forever on my
Yes.
shelf. Uh, but no, I totally agree with you. I think that, and I liked how you phrased it because you're absolutely right. I think that, and it's not a knock on her previous performances,
Yeah.
either in the deleted scenes or Rogue One or Rebels, which we'll talk a little bit more in depth in a minute. But yes, it was definitely playing an homage, right, and trying to
Mhm.
represent what the character was, or what it was at the time, based
Mhm.
on a very limited performance, which is kind of an unfair position to put an actor into because you're not
Yeah.
giving them too much range to be able to flex their acting chops. So
Mhm.
kudos, right, to Tony Gilroy and the whole writing team on Andor for kind of being brave enough to be, well, yeah, you're playing Mon Mothma, but Mon Mothma isn't that character yet, and we're
Yeah.
gonna like give all these layers and complexities to a character that's embroiled in a lot of turmoil, right? And
Mhm.
specifically during that time, so that Genevieve can have some fun, right? And
yeah.
actually act her ass off, which I think is still
Mhm.
criminal that none of the Andor cast got any nods on the Golden Globes, Emmys. I don't know, one of the award shows where
Yeah.
they give accolades to these actors because she ate it up. I mean, everyone ate it up,
Yeah.
but she was incredible. And from what we've seen in the trailers for season two, she's going to continue to be even more incredible. But
Yes.
like you said, where we've seen her the most besides Andor is Star Wars Rebels, which is a very important show because it was the first post Disney Lucasfilm acquisition
Mhm.
that came out of Lucasfilm in a post Clone Wars era before obviously the revival for the final season.
Yeah.
So it was the first Disney Star Wars show in animation, and it was kind of an interesting experiment. New
Yeah.
animation style, new tone, new characters, new canon, whatever that means for nerds that care too much about it. But
yeah.
it ended up being an amazing show, a show that defined fandom for a lot of Star Wars fans out there, the insertion point of fandom for a lot of people,
Yeah.
and a show that I think really got its legs like after the second season and specifically like the third and fourth.
For
And
sure.
it's and now in hindsight looking back at it, a really ambitious show. Like it grew a lot more, and like I need to do a rewatch because in watching all the Mon Mothma scenes now in hindsight, I'm just like, damn, there was a lot of
Good
depth that this
stuff.
show had that at the time you're like, yeah, that's awesome. But now it's just like, oh crap, there's a lot of layers. So as an animation fan, like how did you get into Rebels post Clone Wars? Were you, because I remember when I was gonna get into Rebels, I was a little put off
Yeah.
by the animation style and the aspect ratio. It's not the classic Star Wars one. Ezra was annoying
Yeah.
that first season, but to put it in context and perspective, the animation in Clone Wars sucked the first couple of
Mhm.
seasons, and it was proven by rewatching those Mon Mothma scenes from season two of the Clone Wars.
Mhm.
Ahsoka, not the most compelling character in the movie or the first season. So it's also a show that took a minute to get its legs, and I think a lot of people forget that.
Yeah.
And in many ways, Rebels mirrored that. So, what was your experience with Rebels at the time, and how do you look at it now that it's been I don't know how many years since the show's ended?
Yeah, I have to agree with you first and foremost. Like, I need to do a true rewatch of the series. Not only after rewatching these Mon Mothma episodes, but just in general, going back and watching it and really appreciating it because as we kind of talked about before, we kind of went straight from Clone Wars to Rebels, and I had the same issues. I was like, "Oh, the animation looks ugly because the Clone Wars got so good by the end
Too
of
much
it."
spaghetti arms, yeah.
Yes, and the fact that no men in the series have a butt, they all are just very flat.
Yeah,
And like I
yeah,
don't need them to have a big old butt, but I'm
yeah,
like,
yeah.
not everybody is shaped like a string bean.
That's
So so, it was
yeah,
it was just weird, and of course, I was like, "Oh, it's on Disney XD, so it's gonna be,
mhm,
like,
mhm,
more childish in tone," and we kind of looked back on the Clone Wars for the good and didn't think about, like you mentioned, kind of the rough start that it
mhm,
had. So, getting into Rebels was weird, but of course, as soon as they brought Ahsoka into it,
mhm, mhm,
I was hooked. Um, and it's funny because I remember I wouldn't say I was hate watching the first season, but I was definitely watching it being like, I'm struggling to get through this, but I guess I'm going to keep watching because once again, this was the new Star Wars thing.
mhm,
We didn't have a sequel trilogy yet, so this was the new Star Wars stuff. So of course I was going to watch it. And then of course season two, which I think at this point might be my favorite season of
mm,
Rebels,
interesting.
because it's basically the Clone Wars season 7 before we got
Yeah,
the
yeah.
Clone Wars season 7. But that's when things started to we got more depth. Our characters started to, develop further. We understood who
Mhm,
they were, so they were allowed to go into new experiences and make new relationships. And by then, this is the show where we saw the rebellion, all the different cells come together to form the
mhm,
alliance, which going back and watching these scenes, that's such a
mm,
pivotal moment that
yeah.
I just forget was in Rebels.
I mean, absolutely, and it's one of those things where in going back and rewatching, I'm like, wow, there's so much stuff here because it's like you said, it's happening at the same time as the films are happening. So
Mhm.
when you're in it, you're not really realizing how kind of monumental in many ways it was for Star Wars. Because then, obviously we have Saw Gerrera, but the Saw Gerrera that we
Yes.
had in Clone Wars was, a young buck, right? That's not voiced by Forrest Whitaker, and all of a
Mhm.
sudden we have Saw Gerrera show up in live action in Rogue One, and it's this new war torn character that's
Yeah.
actually like he's in the rebellion, but he's an enemy of
Yeah.
of Mon Mothma in many ways. So it's just like what's happening here, and then to go then back a character that went from animation to live action, which that's the first time that happened in Star Wars, I think.
Yeah.
It wasn't Cat Bane or any of these newer translations that have occurred. So,
Yeah.
but and then from animation to live action, and then back into animation
Mhm.
in Rebels and have Forrest Whitaker come back and do that voice.
Yeah.
It was kind of a big deal, right? To then bring that darkness and complexity of what rebellion is and what uh, this resistance and having all these different factions that are either more peaceful or violent are in a quote unquote kids show.
Yeah.
It's kind of a big deal, and it's all happening at the same time as we're watching Ezra try to, be cool in front of Sabine, or
Oh my
Hera try
god,
to
I
be a
know.
mom, and Kanan try to play it cool and not fall in love with Hera, even though they both know they're in love. So
Yeah.
it's a lot. It was a lot of stuff that was happening. So like you said, I think the show deserves a rewatch recently, especially post Andor season two, because
Yeah.
one thing that I think will be very clear, because I was already feeling it now,
Mhm.
rewatching these scenes in a post Andor season one world, is that Andor season two is probably going to inform how we watch. uh, Rebels in a new light,
Mhm.
because one of the things that Tony Gilroy was talking about, the finale, or the arc of Andor season 2, is that it's going to reframe how we see Rogue One and
Yes.
Cassian's journey there. And I think in many ways Andor season 2 is going to do the exact same thing for not just Mon Mothma as a character in both Rogue One and Rebels, but it's also gonna do it for not just Mon Mothma, but for the rebellion as a whole
Mhm.
in Rebels. So going specifically now into Rebels and Mon Mothma, obviously, like, you were watching Rebels at one period of time, pre
Yeah.
Andor and pre the characterization of Genevieve O'Reilly as Mon Mothma in that show. What was your reaction now watching Rebels and seeing how Mon Mothma is portrayed in that? And how is that, going through that feedback loop of seeing both characters kind of coexist in a similar timeline?
So the funniest thing, I rewatched the first episode I rewatched before we recorded was Secret Cargo, which
Mm-hmm,
is
hmm.
Mon Mothma's introduction essentially
Yeah.
into Rebels. And I kid you not, I was tearing up by the end of it. After the rebellion, she did her speech, all the ships came in above Dantooine. I
Hmm.
started tearing up and I thought to myself, I did not feel this way when I first watched this episode, but now because of Andor going back and rewatching it's recontextualized things. I
Yeah.
care more
Yeah.
about Mon
Yeah.
as a character now. And afterwards I think of something they're doing, they go on a mission and I'm like, where's Lita? Where's Perrin? There's no
Hmm.
mention of her
Hmm.
family at
Hmm.
all.
Yeah. Yeah.
She even
Yeah.
says a line when she is sitting down with Hera in that episode
Yes.
about wanting to basically run away from your problems. Being a pilot, you're able to just kind of go where you are. You don't have to worry about things. And it's like this is the first time she's essentially getting off of Coruscant and getting into the galaxy on the run, as she puts it. It's
Hmm.
such a
Hmm.
weird experience for her. And I'm just very interested because I don't really think we've seen it yet, but I'm interested to see how Mon kind of transitions from politician Mon to leader of essentially a rebel military group.
Yeah, absolutely, and I agree completely, because that's one of those things, scenes in Rebels where you can see the idyllic, the ideal version of Mon, which I think is what
Yeah.
Rebels kind of presents in a lot of ways. It's like the culmination of, like, well, this is the rebel leader. That's, this uh, goal to aspire, right? This paragon of
Yeah.
leadership and good that the Rebel Alliance should strive to be. But it's also, like you said, mentioning Perrin and Lita. It's in many ways also a facade, right? Because he has
Mhm.
to project confidence and project wisdom and project strength in a
Yes.
world where we know that she doesn't necessarily embody those qualities all the time, because of all the
Mhm.
hardships that she is currently going through, right? Because we don't know where her journey in season 2 is going to go in, but
Mhm.
kind of having all these context clues from season 1 and Andor kind of makes the things that she says and the way that she acts in Rebels a lot more tragic, I think.
Yeah.
I think tragic is a good word for it, because it's like she's being strong for others
Mhm.
despite, like, everything that she's been going through. And
Mhm.
like that, yeah, the speech that she gives about the Gorman massacre in the Ghost is, you kind of get preemptive goosebumps, because now, as good Star Wars fans, everyone just dissected all the trailers for season 2,
Yes.
and Tony Gilroy kind of didn't dick around with it, and just like, yes, it's the Gorman massacre, we're gonna see it. And
Yeah.
obviously it's not gonna be straightforward, just a Gorman massacre, as you might remember it from the EU, but because Tony
Mhm.
Gilroy, is not gonna do that. But it's one of those things where it's just like, how does that then inform this scene? And even without seeing season 2, it's still eerie to be like, oh crap, like, this super serious show, political thriller that talks about all these deep political themes, and
Mhm.
how, you stand up against fascism and dictatorship, and are able to find courage in standing up for your ideals. All of a sudden it's just like, oh, it has a line directly and straight into this kids show, where all
Mhm.
of a sudden it's funny to just think about, and funny for lack of a better word, right? Of
Yeah.
the Gorman massacre, right? Massacre is not a word that you see in children's
No.
stories lately, but yeah, all of a sudden, like in this children's quote unquote children's show, you see Mon
Yeah.
Mothma acknowledge the Gorman massacre and calling out Palpatine and establishing the rebellion in no uncertain terms. So it's
Mhm.
definitely powerful in of its own, but now in the context that we live in with the story that we're seeing unfold on
Mhm.
Andor, it makes it even more interesting. But you were mentioning her chat with Hera, and I
Mhm.
also think about her chats with Ezra as well, because in many
Yes.
ways she comes into the show as a parental figure, a guiding force to help.
Mhm.
In the same way that Clone Wars had like the title card that had like the lesson of the episode, Mon
Yes.
Mothma in these episodes also kind of gives the lesson that the characters need to learn. So
Mhm.
anything in particular, you were talking about the Hera scene, but anything in particular that you felt uh, resonated with you in that scene when Mon and Ezra are talking? Obviously, Ezra wants to go to Lothal and help
Mhm.
everybody, but she's like, "Hey, we gotta think bigger than ourselves sometimes."
Yeah, it's funny because once again, I didn't notice these things or pay attention to them as much when I first watched these episodes, but going back and rewatching them, even when I was working on my video about Mon, I was like, there's a lot of good Ezra and Mon moments in this series that you don't necessarily they don't stick out. They're
Mhm,
not she's not saying a monologue to Ezra, but she's kind of teaching him like you can't just go out guns blazing
mhm,
to fight. We have to be calculated in what we do. And if we help, she even says, like, the Empire's on my planet of Chandrila, but if we
mhm,
just help Chandrila and Lothal, what about all the other systems? And I guess this kind of goes into what I mentioned before, where she has to take her calculated nature of her politics and put that into military strategy. And
mhm,
we see Ezra wanting to do the complete opposite, and he just wants to go in and fight immediately. That's what gets him with Saw Gerrera. And we know how that goes. Doesn't go great for him. But these moments with Mon, I feel like she really helps ground Ezra in those moments because
mhm,
while he's disappointed that she's not like, "Yep, go to Lothal. We'll send the fleet right now,"
mhm,
he kind of understands her reasoning, and I think even if he doesn't say like, "I get it," I think he understands the message and understands why they're not just going in and attacking wherever they're needed. It has to be calculated. I think it's a really underrated relationship just because Mon does kind of not act like a parental figure to Ezra
mhm, mhm.
necessarily, but maybe a wiser aunt or uncle, we'll say. You
Yeah.
know what I mean?
But and what you said, it makes that scene even more kind of heartbreaking. And again, not to kind of keep going back to Andor, but we're gonna have to go back to
Yeah.
Andor. It's kind of knowing what she's going through with her personal family. So have her talk to Ezra about Chandrila makes it even more because you know what she's going through with
Yeah.
Lita and Perrin, and obviously that her familial ties are
Mhm.
here a code, right, for Chandrila. So it kind of makes one of those things where she's looking at him saying like, I know what you're talking
Yeah.
about because I'm also there
Mhm.
right now, which is I don't know, somehow like really powerful in a way that I didn't feel at the time when I watched it the first time. So when I watched it the
Right.
first time, it's like, oh, cool, Mon Mothma's back, and we're tying all these things together, and Rebels is being really cool and expanding the lore, and Darth
Yeah.
Maul and Sith holocrons, and we have Soccer. Like it was just like, oh. But now, obviously, hindsight, watching things with a different perspective, it makes you see and appreciate a lot of the things that you couldn't really appreciate in
Mhm.
a first viewing. But there's one scene that for me hit like a hammer to an anvil,
Mhm.
and it was the scene between Saw Gerrera and Mon Mothma. And
It's
in
so
many
good.
ways, it's one of the most powerful scenes of any Star Wars media, when especially now recontextualized as well,
Mhm.
because all we knew about Saw and Mon is what we know from what she said in Rogue One, where
Mhm.
Saw is a terrorist or
Yeah,
a
he's an
partisan or whatever,
extremist.
an extremist. Thank you. There we go. That so they don't. agree with each other, and they're fighting. They're fighting on the same side, but in different ways,
Mhm.
which makes them enemies. Which ties back to then Luthen talking to Saw and saying,
Mhm.
"Aren't you tired of just fighting with people who agree with you?" Which every time I see that scene, I just think about social media and seeing like how progressives slash liberals, whatever you want to call everyone, like on that side, just being caring more about being who's more right as opposed to being like, well, right now, while you're fighting about all who's more right about whether to be vegan or vegetarian, the fascists are taking over
Yeah,
and sending people to prison in El Salvador. So maybe
yeah,
we refocus our energies here. But
yeah.
anyway, I digress. And so having that scene with Luthen and Saw then ties back now into Mon and Saw, because in many ways it makes you sympathize a lot more with Saw, right? Because
A little, yeah.
with from I mean hindsight's 2020, right? And from the outside, you're looking at this uh, war of against the Empire, and you see like, well, obviously the Empire is horrible. They have the Death Star. They have all these things. Obviously, the only way to do war, and to quote Luthen, is to use the enemy's weapons against them.
Mhm.
Um, but Mon doesn't see it that way. She still uh, is trying to find that peaceful solution and being
Mhm.
talk it out. Do convey that Padme energy and have
Yes.
like diplomacy will still rule if we can. Uh, you know, if we can end this war without bloodshed, it's the best way to go. And then, like, Saw just ends that conversation with the most vicious takedown. And I had to write it down because I needed to read it, because I had to. Forrest Whitaker's delivery is also like incredible on that.
Yeah.
Saul just tells Mon, "I hope, Senator, after you've lost and the Empire reigns over the galaxy unopposed, you will find some comfort in the knowledge that you fought according to the rules." Which
Yeah.
I'm just like, whoa, holy crap. So, what did you think about that scene? I mean, seeing that giant hologram of Saw Gerrera's face against tiny, tiny little Mon Mothma.
Mm.
How was that scene in this rewatch and in this recontextualized Mon Mothma discussion that we're having?
It's funny because with the giant saw and the small little Mon Mothma, just the imagery of it, Saw in this scene is so he's just attacking essentially, and
Mhm,
he's baiting her as well, and he baits her to the point where she finally. And what I love about it is that for once, it's like her mask drops, her composure drops,
mhm,
and she
mhm.
gives like a real emotional, raw answer, saying, and I wrote this down: "If we
Yeah.
degrade ourselves to the Empire's level, what will we become?" Like, you'll just become similar to the thing that you're
Mhm,
fighting
mhm,
against. And we could even compare this all the way back to the delegation of
mhm,
2000 and the
mhm, mhm,
deleted scenes of Revenge of the Sith, because they were also trying to get Palpatine to end the war with a peaceful solution. And we knew it was never going to work
mhm, mhm,
because unfortunately, if you I don't want to say that you can't have a peaceful solution against a fascist society, but like unfortunately, you have to fight. That's what it comes
yeah,
down to, and
yeah.
that can be with words, that doesn't have to be physically. But even in this series, we learn that Mon she admits to herself that she can't win this fight against the Empire in the Senate, which is why she resigns and
Mhm,
forms the alliance. But I love this scene as well with her and Saw because, like you said, they're both technically rebels.
mhm,
Saw even says we're both criminals according to the Empire,
mhm,
like,
mhm.
we're no different according to them. At least I act like it. And it's really interesting to see how that may have affected Mon because in the later episodes, she's still very cautious
Mhm.
about, just going outright and attacking.
Yeah,
She's
yeah, yeah.
she's kind of a humanitarian at the end of the day, all the time with all of her policies that we've seen throughout the politics of Star Wars. She's always worried about what's best for the people. And it's very admirable, but that also makes it so she sometimes could be a little too late to act because
Mhm,
she's waiting
mhm.
for the perfect moment. It's such a hard balance to have to strike, and that's why they butt heads because I feel like they're one extreme in the other.
Yeah, and it boils down to all of a sudden the war is over. The Battle of Jakku happens. The Galactic Concordance is signed, and then she becomes Chancellor of the New Republic. But then her first order of business is to demilitarize the
Demilitarization, yeah.
republic, and it's one of those things where you see the good intentions and you see
Exactly.
what she wants to do and do what's right, but also overcompensate in that regard too, where it's just then
Yeah.
do that. You put the gloves down in the name of peace, and then that means that you allow the next the next generation of Gen Z fascists to come up and bring Palpatine 2.0, or I mean, I guess 1.0 because it's the same guy, just in a different body. But you know what I mean. So
Mhm.
it's very interesting, and I definitely want to talk a lot more about Mon, and we will definitely get the chance to do that in Andor season 2.
Yes.
Before we start wrapping up for today, because I think we've had like an awesome conversation, and we there's enough threads to keep pulling at, because
So many.
there's so much to unravel. So
Mhm.
with this conversation about Saw and Mon and where she stands politically in terms of how to approach this fight against the Empire. Now we have the next fight against the Empire in Andor season 2. What would you like to see from Mon in season 2? Since we know there's going to be the Gorman massacre, we know that there's going to be scenes of her in the Senate. What would you like to see from her there? And once that wraps up, do you want to see more Mon Mothma? Or do you think we've had enough of her for now?
Well, I'm gonna answer the easy question first. Yes, I wanna see more Mon Mothma. However, if I have to watch a series of her with a pixie cut and blankets, then I don't want it. Uh
Noted. We'll send that. We'll send that to Lucasfilm. Get that to the art department immediately.
I mean, they have such great costumes. Why put her in a poncho?
Yeah.
Um, but
Some people would say that ponchos are part of the DNA of Star Wars, though.
true. Not hers though. Hers are so boring. Uh, but in general, with Mon, what I want to see in season 2, and I think we will see this to at least a degree. I want to see her get into the more raw emotion and take
Mhm,
charge. Like we've talked about, she's so calculated, and I think she holds a lot back. I kind of want to see an outburst, maybe like this one she had with Saw with
mhm,
her in season 2, because I mean, we're both reading The Mask of Fear. She
mhm,
has a mask on as
mhm,
well.
mhm,
She jokes about in Andor season 1 that she's learned from Palpatine, who might be the king of masking things in Star Wars.
mhm, mhm,
And while it benefits her while she's trying to fight in the shadows, she eventually needs to bring it out to the light. So I want to start seeing her start that journey of speaking out more and getting emotional about it, getting more raw about it, and just seeing how all these things that are happening actually affect her. Um, because I mean, we get little moments with her and Vel where she's like,
mhm,
what have we got ourselves into? And Vel's like, it's the cause. We're not talking about it. This is what you signed up for.
mhm.
Maybe giving her somewhere to explain her emotions a little bit more. I I think at the end of the day, I just want to get deeper into Mon.
Yeah, I mean, and all the characters. I think that's one of the things that season 1 excelled at, was
Yeah.
deconstructing and like going really deep into what makes these characters tick and what their motivations are, what their weaknesses are, what they're afraid of, what they want to be brave against.
Mhm.
So it's or brave for. I don't know. Whatever, doesn't matter. Everyone understood what I was saying. Hopefully, that I hope that season 2 continues that journey, so that all the characters have even more complexity and are more
Yes.
desperate
Yeah.
as the Empire tries to weed them out of their ranks. But out of curiosity, I mean, we know that Mon's journey in Andor continues in Rebels
Mhm.
in many ways, thanks to that Gorman massacre tie-in.
Yeah.
But beyond that, we've seen a little bit of her in Ahsoka.
Mhm.
But what else would you like to see of Mon in a post Return of the Jedi, post Galactic Empire world? Do you want to see her reconnect with Perrin or Lita? Do you want her to get divorced and find new love? Like what's Scotty's wants and desires for Mon in the future?
You mentioning Lita definitely makes me think I would love to eventually see a version where or a future where they can mend their relationship, and
Mhm.
I think a lot of that comes from Mon recognizing that sometimes maybe she put the fight above her
Mhm.
family, her immediate people right there that also needed her. And I would like to see Lita acknowledge that basically she wasn't the greatest either. And she needed to also give her mother more grace because she had no idea what she was going through behind the scenes.
Mhm. Mhm.
That would be really beautiful to see. Um, I like that we've gotten a little bit of Mon in Ahsoka, though I mean, even Genevieve O'Reilly was like, "I'm saying bye to the character. I'm so sad." We all know the writing in
Yeah.
Ahsoka is nowhere near any of the script she had in Andor. Um, so from that standpoint, I would like to see more of Mon. Um, this is such a pilot, like something that is such a pipe dream. But I'd love to see Mon and Leia together, just because of their
Mhm. Mhm.
relationship that
Mhm.
we've read about in the books. It'd be so nice to see more of that,
Yeah.
which would probably be great for an animated series.
Mhm.
Uh,
Absolutely. Yeah.
and in general, I just want to see Mon happy.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
so cheesy to say, but
I like that because Star Wars doesn't always give characters happiness at the end
no.
of their journey, and I think that's fair. And I think that's especially with how, like we said at the beginning, with how horrible the world is currently. I think that yeah, if we can't have happiness in our reality right now, at
Mhm.
least let's have Mon Mothma have happiness in this franchise at some
Yeah,
point. She's earned
yeah.
it. She's been fighting a lot. She has an ungrateful brat of a daughter. Perrin sucks.
Yeah.
So yeah, let's have her live her best life, live, love, laugh, under the Tuscan sun, whatever,
Yes.
you know, and just retire to whatever planet is the equivalent of retiring in Italy, and
There we go.
as a single hot lady. But for now, I think that wraps it up until season two, and we know a little bit more about where Mon is going, or the spin-off animated show is announced. But like I said at the beginning, thank you, Scotty, for
Yeah.
joining Triad and being here and talking about Mon and talking about Andor, a little bit of celebration speculation. Uh,
Mhm.
Truly appreciate it. I know like this was a little last minute, so very thankful for your grace and flexibility in being here with us. But before we wrap up and sign everything out, why don't you tell everyone where they can find you and what you're up to?
Yes. So you can find me on social media at Scotty Holiday SW. Um, I think all my handles, yep, they're all Scotty Holiday SW. I'm most active on Blue Sky and YouTube, so definitely check my content out there. I make lots of videos about theories, animation. I do streams occasionally, so we have a really good time. And I always like to point out the fact that not only am I a queer person, but I'm also a Star Wars fan. So coming at things from a queer
Mhm.
perspective, that's always something I try to infuse in what I do. I'm also on a podcast called This is the Wayseekers. You can find us at Wayseekers Pod on social media. Uh, and with that, I just want to say thank you as well for having me because you've been on my list of people to reach
Oh,
out to collaborate with. So this worked out really well.
it has, and then it's definitely the first, but obviously not the last. We'll make sure to leave the links down in the description below so that people can find you even easier than they
Thank
would
you.
otherwise. So make sure to follow because we have to support each other. I know that we're living in unfortunate administration that wants to
Yes.
kill diversity, kill equity, kill inclusion, and try to pretend that voices aren't important in discourse. And I think that the strides that we might have done, even though they were minuscule in the past, are important, and we have to still
Yes.
advocate for that. And Triad has always been vocal about the importance of all these things. And now more than ever, we have to amplify our and our peers' voices because they're important more now, so more than ever. I mean,
Yes.
they're always important, but in moments where those voices want to be silenced, we have to elevate them even more. And I think that there's a lot of podcasters and YouTubers out there that have fallen in line and have kind of stopped their own internal DEI
Mm,
programs and don't platform us in the same ways that they did a couple of years ago. And it's a shame to see that. You know who you
yes.
are. But we're continuing our mission in doing that. But especially now in an Andor woke show. So Andor's woke. Don't let the nuts and bolts distract you. But
Yeah.
anyway, I digress. I digress. We'll continue talking about it once Andor season 2 comes out. Uh, Thank you everybody for tuning in, for listening to Scotty, for listening to myself, to see what we have to say about Mon and Rebels. Uh, we have been Trial of the Force. Thank you so much. If you like everything you've heard, everything you've seen, and want to keep supporting us, please make sure to share, like, subscribe, follow us on Blue. I was going to say Bluetooth on Blue Sky, Instagram, YouTube, all those things. The description is down below. On Friday, I'm flying out to Japan, so we will be Triad's going to be unplugged from the socials, or at least from podcasting, for the next week and a half. So we'll be back to cover everything that was announced in Star Wars Celebration, but more importantly, to cover Andor season 2. So please make sure to tune in for that. But with that, once again, we're Triad of the Force. Thank you so much, and may the Force be with you.